So during the Nintendo Direct, we got some news of a PlayStation 1 RPG that is near and dear to my heart is coming to Nintendo Switch. For some reason, Chrono Cross is coming to Nintendo Switch before Chrono Trigger. But I am so incredibly happy that Chrono Cross is coming out on a modern console that like people can play and people are playing, because I think the last console release that it was playable on was the Vita. And no one actually had a Vita. It was all just a myth. But this remastered version, which is coming out to every platform, I think it's coming out Xbox and PlayStation as well. It's remastered visuals. It has some of those niceties that some of the Final Fantasy ports of the era have, where like you can turn off random battles. I don't think they've said anything about like speed up or like fast forward like the Final Fantasy VII has. But they're also remastering the soundtrack, which, if you know one thing about Chrono Cross, it's that the soundtrack from Yasunori Mitsuda is maybe one of the greatest video game soundtracks of all time. And even if you play that game and hate it, I would imagine that you would come away walking away from being like, well, but the music was really good. Either of you, do you have experience with Chrono Cross? And if not, or if so, are you going to play this new version?
So I've been wanting to play Chrono Cross, but I haven't had a way to. Despite even actually owning a PS Vita, I think it's not on the store anymore.
You don't. What did I say? You don't actually own it. It's a myth.
Yes. It's just it's an ephemeral thing. It's an idea more than an actual.
Yeah. If you think about it too hard, it'll just disappear from your hands.
Right.
Stop thinking about it.
It's a dream that I had. But Chrono Cross, it's something that I'm really excited to play, and I might dive into. The Radical Dreamers. I think we'd be remiss to not mention.
Yeah, that's super cool.
The Satellaview game is also going to be included.
Yeah, so it's a Satellaview visual novel.
Yes,
that is essentially the foundation for Chrono Cross. It has like Surge, Lynx, and Kid are in it, and it kind of is I've never actually played it. I've only read about it before. I look forward to playing it in this version. But it kind of like outlines like it's almost like a rough draft of the early part of Chrono Cross. I don't know, is it canon or not? I'm not 100% sure, but it's just cool that like they're actually going through and bringing back this thing that was on Satellaview, the Super Nintendo like downloadable online service. And I think we did a fact check on it that this is the first Satellaview game to ever get re-released after Satellaview, right?
We could be wrong about that, but we couldn't find. Both I and Donald looked, and we couldn't find any other instance of a Satellaview game being re-released.
I know. Like there's some of the, like you can play some ROMs and emulators of them.
Oh sure, yeah, they're available. But as far as like official releases, I think this may be the first one.
And it's just cool to have it there, and it's one of those things that like I look forward to messing around with Radical Dreamers. Is it good? I don't know, and honestly, I don't care. Just the fact that it's there is really cool, and yeah, Chrono Cross in itself, like I think it's a very maybe it's a properly rated RPG, because I think it is like one that's like super critically acclaimed, like sold all right and everything. I think it doesn't get talked about enough because
it's overshadowed by Trigger, right? Like it's supposed to be the sequel to Chrono Trigger, and yet it plays completely differently and is a kind of a departure.
It's also it's one of those things where how do you follow up a game like Chrono Trigger?
Right.
Like Chrono Trigger is widely considered to be like one of the greatest games, greatest RPGs of its era. Like, how do you follow that up? It's not like it's something where it's like, oh, like Final Fantasy VI or Final Fantasy VII is a masterpiece. How do you follow that up? It's like, well, even with those, like you still had 5 or 6 games in the series before then, so it's not like it's not like the first Final Fantasy came out and people were like 10 out of 10, perfect game, never make another one. Chrono Trigger came out and kind of was like that, where like this game's incredible. It was like a dream team of developers. And then all of them left and did other things, and left one guy, Masato Kato, to be the director of Chrono Cross. And he did work on Trigger, but like he's not Yuji Horii. He's not, I forget some of the other luminaries that were a part of Chrono Trigger off the top of my head, but like it's a who's who of both Squaresoft and Enix at the time. Whereas Chrono Cross is Masato Kato, who is a personal favorite, like, game creator of mine. Some of his earliest work is on Ninja Gaiden on NES. He's responsible for a lot of these story scenes in those games, and then he went over to work at Square and worked on like the story for Chrono Trigger, and then worked on Chrono Cross as a director, and now he did that game Another Eden that actually recently had a Chrono Cross crossover, which maybe we should have read more into that. Think that this was coming soon. But the thing with Chrono Cross is that it's not Trigger. It is a Kill Your Darlings sequel. It almost like John, you might not like this comment. Chrono Cross is kind of the Last Jedi of Chrono Trigger. I was gonna
It subverts
ask
your
you
expectations.
I was gonna ask you if it was the Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts of the Chrono series.
I mean, like, that also fits, like, because that's the thing. I mean, like, and it is weird because like the Chrono series is 2 or maybe 3 games if you count Radical Dreamers. In which case, then Chrono Trigger's the weirdo. But like it's like with Chrono. So with Chrono Trigger, a lot of it's linear through time. At a basic level, Chrono Cross is about it's dimensional warping. It's not like you're going to different time periods. It is you are going to your home world and then another world. And as you find out very early on in the game, there is kind of a dividing moment of you play this character Surge, looks a lot like Chrono, no relation, and I don't think that's like, I guess that's not a spoiler. I don't know, but Surge is this character who he's in home world, and then he gets transported to another world and finds out that he died in that world, and
That's
that
a bummer.
goes through this absolutely bonkers weirdo wagadoo story that along the way like does cross over into Chrono Trigger in a lot of very impactful, meaningful ways.
Okay.
But it I mean, like, at its base, like, it has that similarity to Chrono Trigger in the fact that, well, Chrono Trigger is about time. This is about going between dimensions instead, and you only go between home and another world. There's a lot of different twists along the ways. A lot of weird things happen. Some of the like probably one of the things that I think kind of maybe dulls some of the impact of the story, even though I think the story overall is really solid, is the fact that you have 40 playable characters.
Yeah.
Which at a certain point is preposterous. Like, one of the first characters you can get is a dog named Poshel, who's a big pink fluffy dog, and he's adorable. There is like a spaceman that you can get that kind of looks like Olimar. There's also a dude that, like, I think initially was supposed to be I'm totally blanking on the name of the villain that joins your party at Chrono Trigger.
Magnus?
Yeah, Magus. Yeah, there's a guy that, like, was supposed to be called Magus and then he wasn't, but it's still kind of like, oh, maybe he's like Magus. There's all these things, because I think through development there might have been more overt initial ties to Chrono Trigger. But like, there's such a dizzying amount of characters, and some of them are really dumb. Like, a cook joins your party. There's like there's a Harlequin who becomes kind of important to the plot. But the trick with it is that it's from that era of localization where I guess you could call it like the Dragon Quest accent era, where so you have this rotating cast, and basically everybody has, like, no matter who your party is, they'll kind of react in similar ways. But the difference is that they'll all have, like, weird, stupid accents. And one of, like, a very important character that you meet early on is this girl named Kid, who talks in a Cockney accent and says arse a lot.
Oh, that's awesome.
But it's just like seeing, like, all these things mutate depending on who you have in your party is very funny.
Yeah.
And then with that too, the battle system, which it's been a while since I've done a full playthrough of the game. But the battle system involves, like, using different elemental abilities to kind of, like, set the field in a way that becomes strategically interesting and complex. And, like, it's something that I haven't really seen a lot of games do well. It's a game that I've been wanting to revisit for a long time. I did have it's a lot of, like, pre-Nintendo World Report times where I used to, like, replay games more often. Chrono Cross and Super Mario RPG and even, like, Trigger and Final Fantasy VI were games that I used to replay on a more frequent clip. And then the mixture of age and doing this whole, like, video game press thing I stopped replaying games as much, especially long RPGs.
Yeah.
But yeah, Chrono Cross is a game that I am ecstatic that it's coming out April 7th. It's not even that far away. We are like 2 months out from me.
Oh wow,
not
that's
shutting up about
that's quick.
Yeah. And this is something that I think I vaguely threatened for a long time. I am not going to shut up about this game unless I play it and I'm like, oh god, no, it's held up terribly. This is bad. And I saw people kind of knocking the visuals in the trailer, and like what is it?
It's a PS1 game.
It's a 2000 PlayStation 1. What the hell do you expect?
It looks really good for PlayStation 1.
Actually, I mean, I will say, I think some of the, pre-rendered backgrounds and everything, like, okay, yeah, those definitely show it, but like, it doesn't look gross.
I don't think
fine.
I don't think you get to stand there and say that Final Fantasy VII hasn't aged a day, but that this looks ugly.
Yeah.
Oh, Final
the
Fantasy
characters
VII
look
has
fine.
aged
I like
several days.
I like some of. You can even see some of it in what they showed. Like, it's just a little cleaner, a little smoother. Like really, really looking forward to seeing how the game comes together.
I think
and
those
there is
like new 3D models too.
Yeah, the characters look like they've at least been retextured.
Yeah. And remastered soundtrack is worth noting, which I think we heard a little bit of it in the trailer. Like, once again, one of the best soundtracks. Not even a video games, just best soundtracks ever. That game's the soundtrack is incredible. It's amazing. Tour de force.
Yeah, and this era of Square is just very fascinating to me. The PS1 era, because they're just trying so much different crap within the JRPG space. Because they're at the top of their game, and they just have so many different teams. So I this is along those lines of like a Vagrant Story or a Xenogears, where it's just like they're doing something different, and I'm really excited to play it.
So another game that was announced during this direct that is also tied to Square of ancient days of the 1990s. Weirdly, this game's being published by Nintendo outside of Japan. That is Live Alive, which is. Did you guys ever hear of Live Alive before today?
I know that name. I have heard of it.
It's one of those. This is one of those JRPGs that never made to the West that's like secretly great. But other than that, I don't know all the details for it.
So there was actually, I've been thinking about playing this kind of in the past year or two. There's actually a shout out to the podcast Retronauts. They had an episode on it. I think it was sometime in 2021. But this is a 1994 Super Famicom game that kind of under the radar compared to Square's other games at the time, because this would have been like a contemporary with Final Fantasy IV, like around the same time as like Chrono Trigger would have been like a year or so after this. But it was also the directorial debut of Takashi Tokita, who at this point is one of he's worked at Square Enix consistently since 1985.
Wow.
Here's just some of the things that Tokita has done since directing his first game, which is Live Alive. He directed Chrono Trigger, Parasite Eve, Chocobo Racing, The Bouncer, Final Fantasy IV on DS, Final Fantasy IV: The Four Heroes of Light. There is a certain point where he fades into producer land, but instrumental into Final Fantasy, and like a dude who went from this to making Chrono Trigger.
The gimmick with this one is that you play as different characters going through their separate stories. Do they converge at any point?
Yes, to my knowledge, and this is also not having played the game, but just kind of, been interested in possibly playing it, is the way it works is that there are 7 different stories across different eras. There's like a caveman era, there's a Wild West spaghetti western era, there's a future area, I think there's kind of like a samurai area as well, but they're all throughout different times, and I think part of the hook was that all of these 7 stories were handled by different manga artists. Okay. So they all have different character designs. It has a soundtrack by Yoko Shimomura, which is also worth pointing out because she's, up there with Yasunori Mitsuda as one of the greatest video game composers of all time. So there are those 7 different chapters, which I believe you can take in any order. And then there is an 8th chapter that after you play all the other 7 unlocks and kind of converges everything. And kind of talking more specifically about that would be spoilers, but I think they might have even mentioned it in the trailer, the fact that like there's 7 chapters that you play and then everything converges, but it's supposed to be a fantastic game, and one of those things about it is how it kind of goes into each of the eras, like making sense in that world. Like the caveman era, you don't actually, I believe you don't really have dialogue. I think it's just like emojis and stuff like that, because they would not have language then.
Right.
So it's a Camelot RPG.
Yeah. And then stuff where it's like you have different battle systems where, you know, in the future, I think it's probably more like ray gun based, whereas you'll have guns in the Wild West, but maybe it's sword fighting in the samurai era or something like that.
And another thing to note is this is a 2D HD game.
Yes.
Yeah, HD 2D game.
HD 2D.
Yeah. Which does, it is one of those things where it's why it's surprising to me that it's published by Nintendo outside of Japan. Because to me, I've seen a lot of these remasters, you know, like Saga Frontier, Legend of Mana, even Trials of Mana, which, I mean, I think Trials of Mana was revealed in the Nintendo Direct, but I don't think it was, it was on, I think, Switch and PlayStation 4 at the same time.
Yeah.
But all those games, like, from that, you know, we're taking a PS1 or a Super Nintendo game or whatever and bringing it over, like, none of those were deliberately console exclusive. Like, Romancing Saga 3, I believe, came out on a couple platforms. It's a little weird to me to see Live Alive be a Nintendo Switch exclusive, at least at first, but this game seems to be more in the bucket of the Octopaths and the Bravely Defaults of the world, of being that, like, you know, Switch first. I believe it's still being published in Square Enix in Japan, but it's just Nintendo throughout the West.
This might come to PC within a year, but it's probably going to live on
Yeah,
Switch.
like I know Octopath, it definitely happened with Bravely Default 2, I think also came to PC.
It's on Steam now, I believe.
Oh, did it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's probably the path that Live Alive has. It's just weird to me to see, you know, that remake come in that fashion. And it does make me think that it could be the HD 2D side of it is part of the reason why Nintendo's kind of attached to it outside of Japan. And will Dragon Quest 3, the HD 2D remake of that, will that also be a Switch exclusive published by Nintendo outside of Japan? And kind of think it might be.
Yeah, possibly.
I mean, more power to them if they want to keep. If I assume that part of that, like, I wouldn't be surprised if they're throwing some money at these too, like outside of just publishing them outside Japan. If they're that involved in it, I feel like they might have some money tied up in the back end to either help produce them or, I guess, just get them as timed exclusives. But
yeah, I mean, there's definitely some kind of, I mean, like, I feel like Square's not going to give these games out for free.
I don't know how Octopath Traveler and stuff like that did outside Switch. Like, I know they did okay on Switch, right?
I think, yeah.
On Switch it was?
Octopath was very successful for what it was.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, maybe they just
like
do well on Switch.
Yeah, 1 million unit sales for Octopath, it would be very successful. And I forget if the 1 million sales were reached before or after the PC release, but I definitely remember hearing that Octopath cracked 1 million.
Yeah, I believe, you know, if Live Alive gets 1 million, that would be crazy.
Yeah, there's a note. I have the Wikipedia up here just to make sure I've got some of my facts right. It said it was considered a failure back in the day for selling 270,000 units.
It's because they didn't release it anywhere.
Yeah, no, it was only in Japan. There's not a lot of people there comparatively.
It's a very small country.
But yeah, that's Live Alive, and that and Chrono Cross. Square's doing work for Nintendo Switch.
Mm-hmm.
This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more. All for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.